following is a video interview between Hannah DeRue and Tony Bright Paul. Now, I knew Tony Bright Paul. He died last year, well into his 90s, and he's an important Subud member in that he was here at the very beginning. Now, for those of you who are new to Subud, Subud is a phenomenon. It's an upgrade of humanity from 5 senses to 6 senses. It's very difficult to put into words, but once you understand that's what's going on, the following video should make a lot of sense. I should add that Subud is available to people of all faiths, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and anyone who is willing to believe in the one Almighty God.
Got it, yeah. Okay, yeah. So are we being recorded? Have I got to click on got it now?
Yes, do you see that in your screen or not?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So Anthony Bright Paul, we are together today to hear a little bit from you. You've written this book that many Subud members know. It's called My Stairway to Subud. But of course, it's much better to hear from yourself about your history. There it is, My Stairway to Subud.
And there is the original.
Yeah,
there is the original book that was published by Dan Cahill in America. That one.
Yes.
And a lot of people didn't realize that this book is about 3 times the size. But anyway, we made a little temporary recording the other day as an experiment. And one of the things that I talked about then was my very first Latihan. And indeed, because I was living in Manchester, the first Latihan occurred for all those people who had to travel long distances. And reading in my book again, I realized that it was on a Whit Monday, 1957. So that establishes the exact date, although I understood from some of the ladies that in fact they had actually already done a Latihan first of all. Now, a lot of my book is concerned with what we call the work, the Gurdjieff work. And of necessity, there was a sort of great belief that nothing could be achieved except by efforts, and that you had to make these efforts or super efforts for a long time, and so on. So when Bennett introduced the idea that we all needed help, and that since Mr. Gurdjieff had died in 1948, 49, and I joined Bennett when I was 21. Now, along comes Bapak in 1957 when I was 26, 27. So I well remember that we went up to Bennett's study for a preparation before this very first Latihan. And we had no idea what was going to happen. We were told to take off our shoes and watches and so on. And when we went downstairs, we were just to relax and stand in a sort of circle. And Subud was in the room. And so we all filed down to the dining room. There were 15 of us. And so we went into this dining room and stood up and closed our eyes. Well, luckily, because I wrote this book, I was able to read up about it. And in fact, some of the things that I said in my previous short interview with you weren't really correct. What was clear was that as soon as Bapak had said a few words about worship of God and so on, which for us, by the way, at that time was a very strange thing to say, because lots of us didn't really believe in God. We all believed in the Gurdjieff idea that we were trying to be men, trying to be. So there was a sort of different sort of aim. Well, after he had said his words for a few minutes that we should relax and so on, a very strange sort of singing arose. And because there was at least 2 Indonesian helpers in the room, Rahan and Ahmad, but also there was Hussein Rafe, and they began singing all together and with lots of Allahu Akbar and so on. And once this started, I began to hear people shuffling about. And then I could hear a voice to my far right as somebody was crying, weeping. And as it went on, I had no doubt about the sacredness, because the way that people were singing was full of sorrow, if you like. It was full of I've forgotten what the words that I actually wrote down, and I remember, yeah. But if I simply say prayer in a loud voice, such as one has heard from a priest or a muezzin, this would give entirely a wrong impression. This prayer seemed to be heaved from the very depths of their being, as if they were in an agony of remorse, sorrow, and supplication. Now that is much more how I felt at the time. But at the same time, I was holding on to myself rather than relaxing. There was a beautiful smell. That was one little detail that I forgot to mention. There was this wonderful smell, but people began to cry and laugh and so on. And then suddenly, after half an hour, the word finish, and we all filed out, speechless, I might say. There was a whole lot of people in the hall, seated in the hall. There was a large hall, and they were all looking at us because obviously through the dining room door, they had heard all this noise of singing and so on. And so we got the train from New Malden up to London, and then I went on up to Manchester. And I was really I didn't know where I was with this strange exercise. I couldn't make it out. Nevertheless, I still came back the following weekend and for a number of weekends afterwards. And after that, instead of there being a big noise in the Latihans, they'd quietened down. And in fact, I remember standing and I was bored. I thought, what is this? And to such a degree that I saw all my friends with flushed faces, all very excited and so on. And of course, I remember I felt just as Bill Aiken, a friend of mine, also felt, oh gosh, were we such sinners that we weren't able to experience anything? Anyway, I finally decided that I would have to give up this Subud and give up the work and everything. And I motored down from Manchester and I went to see my friends, the Pensionees in Hampstead. And they were great friends of mine. And they just laughed as I was like a hornet stinging them. And John Pensioney said to me, don't even try anything. Don't even try to be open. Anyway, I went down to Coombe Springs, and by that time, a large hut had been erected in the grounds, which could take at least 30 people. And so I went to what I thought was going to be my very last Latihan. And I was going to open my eyes and see what all this nonsense was about. So I thought. So I went in, and when I went into this Latihan, Bapak was there and various helpers. And I was watching people make movements with their arms. Peter Commode was rolling on the floor. Bennett was crashing from one side of the hut to the other. And Bapak was walking about smoking a cigar and occasionally stopping in front of somebody. So while this was happening, suddenly Ihsan Ahmed was in front of me and he said to me, close your eyes. And of course, close your eyes, but it sounded like close your ice. So he began chanting. He was about 2 yards away from me. And he was saying, Allah, Allah, Allah. And I felt like a huge something rained down in front through me and bent me back and forth and back and forth, and then threw me to the ground. And immediately I was as happy as a sandboy. I mean, you know, and I thought to myself afterwards, if anybody read this who's not in Subud, anyone in Subud would understand, but anyone outside would think this fellow's been hypnotized. Anyway, that was the thing. And from that moment, my whole attitude towards Subud changed. Sorry, now I've gone on for, I don't know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Okay. So that was your first, so that was in 57, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You were talking about, yeah. And so since then, how did that develop? So did you start doing Latihan regularly, or twice a week, or 3 times a week, or more,
or more? More, because my job in Manchester was a salesman traveling around. So I was, if you take England, if you take from Liverpool across to Hull and then right up to the Scottish border, that was my territory. And so I was constantly going round, and very quickly, because even in 1957, I had forgotten this, there was a big Gurdjieff seminar just when Bapak was first there. And the result of the seminar is that people used to come from Manchester, Bournemouth, Bristol, all over the United Kingdom, as well as from the continent, from Norway, Germany, Holland particularly. So that was I mean, there was so lots of people got opened because there was no 3-month probation period when Bapak arrived. So it was mostly Bennett's men, but there were also different Gurdjieff groups in London with Ronimon von Bissing. They were really Ouspensky groups, very secretive, and they came in and so on. So so Subud expanded very quickly. Well, one of the things that happened shortly was that Bapak was invited to Holland to, I've forgotten the name of the fellow. He's
the Tjalsmas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charlesma, Tjalsma. Charlesma, and he went over to Holland. And of course, it's difficult for people to realize at the time, but the relation between Holland and Indonesia was Holland ruled Indonesia. These Indonesians, a lot of them, had been machine gunning, rebelling against the Dutch after the Japs had left during the war. So I think that the Indonesians were also a bit sensitive about how the Dutch would regard them. Anyway, it all went well. But before he went to Holland, I was in the full flush. Once I'd started, I was exercising a lot. I'll explain later. But the thing was this: I realized it was Bennett who first took me into Bapak's room to ask him whether he would come up to Manchester, because we had a group up there. And to my great surprise, Bapak said, yeah, in 5 days. In 5 days. Well, I must also tell you that this was the first time that I had been into a room, quite a small room, with Bapak and Ibu in there. And as I went in, there was this terrific sort of feeling like waves of something rolling over me just as I came in the doorway. And I remember thinking then, Bapak knows everything about me. You know, you had this feeling. So it was a momentous occasion. It was, so I was mistaken in saying that it was the Indonesian who actually took me into Bapak's study first of all. But later on, I went in often. And
but Tony, how did that make you feel? I mean, having the feeling that Bapak knew everything about you, did it make you feel shy or uncomfortable, or did it make you feel humble?
Oh, no. Because you never, ever, Bapak always made everybody happy, feel at ease. You know, there was nothing you could hide. And of course, you asked me the other day, by the way, I'm backtracking a bit. On the day after I had my first experience, when I was bowled, literally laid out on the floor, and I could feel this force swaying through my body. And I could then understand why people, when I could see they were flushed and so on. And I went up to the kitchen and people said to me at once, "Oh, Tony," they could see that I had experienced. It was like that in those days. It was amazing. And the next day, I happened to see, Anwar in the hall. I saw him in the hallway, and he came into the rose garden with me and sat on a seat there. And he began, "You asked me, what did he test?"
Oh, this is about Iksan, I think.
Iksan Ahmed.
Yeah.
Iksan Ahmed. Sorry, you've prompted me. Thank goodness. I lose things these days. I'm sorry. And so Iksan would say to me, "I say Allah, I say Allah." Same thing I say, "Lord, Lord." So it didn't matter what he said. He had me going at once, and he would say, then he would test my eyes and my ears. And he said, my ears were more purified than my eyes, which struck me as a bit strange. But because I'm a bit deaf and I've got wonderful eyesight still. I mean, I can look out, I can see miles. Anyway, of course, he was talking on a spiritual level, and Iksan became a wonderful, wonderful friend. I mean, he would talk about, he says, "Here am I doing this," but he said he's machine gunned lots of people. And he would kick a tennis ball about on the sacred lawns at Coombe Springs. That's a picture of the building.
Yeah, a bit higher, so we can see all the people. A bit higher. Yes, yes, yes. It's a very famous picture, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, well, there's Rohana, Bapak in the middle, Rohana Wati, Shafruddin, and there's me next to Edith Vickman. I with black hair there.
Nice.
So anyway, so of course, because of this immediate expansion, there were groups forming in Bournemouth, Bristol, everywhere through that seminar. And because I was a traveling salesman, and because my office, my center of where they made the Golden Valley colors, because I was selling pigment dye stuffs, was in Bristol. So I'd be traveling in the north, also going down to Bristol and also going to Coombe Springs. And so I was traveling between the groups, and I was very lucky. So I got to know a lot of the people of that period. And of course, once we had experienced, we began to swap notes. And I remember asking the person whom I'd heard weeping in the first exercise how it was and what happened. And he said, "Oh, well," he said, "the weeping simply went through him. He, and he was very military. He was ex-army type, worked very hard on the buildings there. And later on, actually, I shared a flat with him in Manchester. Anyway, just to go on with, after Bennett had taken me in to see Bapak, and Bapak had said, yes, he would come to Manchester. In 5 days, I immediately got on the phone and rang up to my friends in Manchester and said, we've got to collect money, and we've also got to hire halls and all this sort of thing. And I got back to Manchester in haste. And I remember one of the fellows called Bob Paskin immediately gave me £50. Now, in those days, £50 was a lot of money, because I was earning £300 a year.
Oh, wow, a year.
Plus a car and plus 1% commission. So, I mean, I had the great ambition to get up to £1,000 a year, which I thought I would be in clover for the rest of my life. You know, there's been inflation, so it was totally different then. Anyway, Bob Paskin, a big party came up. Bapak came up, and Sheila Ross came up too, and a certain party in Victoria Park, my friends, they decided to put Bapak and Sheila Ross, and I don't think actually I was right in saying that Ibu Rahayu came, but certainly Ismana and Iksan came up to Manchester.
And who is Sheila Ross? Who is Sheila Ross?
Sheila Ross was actually one of the ladies whom very quickly Ibu had taken under her wing. She was a big girl, like you.
Like me? Okay. I'm a big girl.
She was a tall girl, and I remember one of the things which I remember with Sheila Ross. Bapak did a test. How big is the whole world for someone who has a soul on the vegetable level? And I said, oh, I didn't get any of these tests. I didn't understand what they were all about. And she said it was like a prick on the end of the tongue, that when a person had a soul on that level, the earth was just tiny. Anyway, so she was very much in favor. She came up. Ibu insisted her being with us and so on. What I very well remember, though, was we went back to Johnny Tara's house after our first Latihan, which was a very nice room over a co-op store, right near a bus stop. And I think Bennett was a bit concerned because we were extremely noisy. And afterwards, we went back and crowded into this tiny house in Victoria Park, Manchester. And Bapak came and was sitting on the sofa with Iksan and Ismana, and the television was on. And I was looking at the television. We never watched television at Coombe Springs, never, you know, and there was some ghastly singer. So I thought, and I said to Ismana, do you like her? And Ismana said, I like her. It may sound funny and not significant now, but for me at the time, it was. She just liked her. And so I remember Bennett coming in at the back of the sofa and glaring at all of us as if, we ought to all go home, but we didn't. There were a whole crowd of us in the room with Bapak, and Bapak began to talk with us. The leaders in the Gurdjieff group never did anything like that. And so Iksan was there, and I was saying to him, if he could ask Bapak what sort of preparation we needed to do before the Latihan. And this was translated to Bapak. And immediately he said, Tida! Tida! Whenever I used to see Iksan after that, and he would meet me in the hall, he would raise his arms and say, Tida, nothing. And of course, Iksan himself had very often sat next to me in the hallway and said, exercise quietly within yourself. So there was always in Subud these sort of contradictory things. On the one hand, Tida, and certainly Hussein Rafi also would say that preparation, he say, the Latihan is the preparation. Now,
yeah, but I also remember, if I can shortly interrupt you, that the ladies once asked about how they should prepare for the Latihan, and that Ibu Yati said, just be very quiet and yeah, don't do anything. This is more or less the same. Don't do anything, but be quiet. Don't come to the Latihan with a lot of things from your daily life, or thoughts or worries or ideas and things like that. Just get very quiet and calm. So is that the same thing that you understood at that time?
Actually, there wasn't, well, there wasn't much talk about quiet. That came later, where people used to talk. They used to have a quarter of an hour's quiet. Gosh, I hated the quiet, actually, sitting there and everybody thinking. It wasn't quiet. It was, to be quiet is something else, is to be really quiet. But it's so easy that a person sits there and begins thinking, how the hell am I going to pay my next payment of my mortgage, or whatever it is? I mean, Bapak gives many examples in book 1 of all the sort of thoughts that people could have. And so I was very much inclined to agree with Hussein Rafi that it was the exercise which cleared out the thoughts, and at the end of the exercise one could feel clear, and in fact not just clear, but you also were drawn to the people you also felt had had a good exercise and were very open. That was it. Of course, as the years went on, because this was 57, going by 1959, the Jami Chinatra, the great big 9-sided building, had been completed and was open for the 1959 Congress. And I was put into O Group.
Not very quiet. O Group.
The O Groupers were very proud. Everybody else thought that they, looked down on these people who were so noisy. Well, it wasn't so noisy, but what was wonderful for us was they went into this thing, and because there was all this idea about Bapak hypnotizing people, or the helpers, so on. There were no Indonesian helpers in there whatsoever. We just gathered, nodded to each other, and off we went. Whatever we were doing, whether it was spinning, rolling on the floor, and so on. And so, at least I think this is of interest, I hope. When after my first exercise, and I went away on a holiday for a few days down to the seaside or something, and I came back and I was thinking to myself, will my exercise start again? And this time I was just standing up, and I suddenly found my body rotating quickly and my arms being flung out for about 10 minutes, and then it stopped. And then the next time it maybe might go on for a quarter of an hour or 20 minutes, gradually making, but I was completely silent. And then one day I was doing my exercise and I felt as if I was on a turntable, and I was whizzed round and round, and at the same time an enormous howl came out of my mouth. Ooh, what a noise. And so I began a period when I was whirling like a dervish. Now, the interest for us who were Gurdjieff people was because we had already done Gurdjieff movements where we did whirling, but it was all very polite and dressed up in white robes and with sashes and headbands and so on. So it was very picturesque. But this whirling that I did was not picturesque at all. It was extremely violent. And in fact, I have to confess, I could not totally relax. After spinning for a bit, I would stop because I felt as if I would be disappearing into nowhere. I didn't know what. And I was frankly often quite scared. And after this horrible howl, gradually I began to say words. And there was a Jewish fellow in my Manchester group, and he came up to me afterwards, one at Latihan, and said, "You've been talking Yiddish, Tony. I said, "What have I been saying?" He said, "You've been saying the principal parts of the verbs." Nothing very, very exciting. So later on, the speaking began to get clearer and clearer. And so I remember asking later on, when Harry Ono came to England, when Harry Ono came to England, and I asked him one day, since he had heard me speaking in the Latihan, I said, "What have I been saying, Harry Ono?" He said to me, "Well, if you want to know, what you've been saying is, my armpits stink." So no, it wasn't really very good. But I must tell you another thing too, which when I got friendly with Iksan, he gave me all sorts of advice. And one of the advices he gave me was regarding the opposite sex. and he said to me, not touch, not touch. And I understood from what he said was that if I were to touch a girl, she would immediately fall in love with me. Well, I was 27 at the time, So anyway, I can't tell you what happened after that. But, oh yes, well, I can tell you that it was shortly after that that I was in a big Latihan, and Bapak was there, and Asakin, and so on. And Asakin came to me after the Latihan and said to me, Tony, what have you been doing? And I said, why? You were shouting out, it is completely forbidden by God. Oh God, can you imagine how I felt? He said, it is completely forbidden by God. And Bapak was there, and he hear you. So well, anyway.
What did that refer to? What was that connected with the other thing that he told you, or?
Yeah, he told me not touch. I mean, in other words, in those, it was difficult to describe, but I mean, I was used to flirting with girls and kissing and cuddling them, perhaps, or whatever.
And then you understood, yeah.
And
that
so
it was actually forbidden.
Oh, I knew very well.
Okay. But did that change you in any way?
Well, of course it was changing me all the time, I hope. But not always. I mean, I'm sure that sometimes I went backwards. Yes. And in fact, as in that wonderful period, everybody for about 4 years, there was a tremendous expansion. And there was always this feeling that Subud was going to expand and expand and expand. And then it began to contract and contract and get smaller. That was very disturbing. And people, where there had been big groups in Ceylon, Sri Lanka, or wherever it was, even in Indonesia, that there were groups that were big grew smaller and lost their members. And I think Bapak liked to know that the numbers were increasing, but also quite accepted. He said so that, if the numbers didn't increase. Now, I've said that this should be a conversation. Now, you are miles younger than me. I'm getting on for 93, and you're about 56 or something.
Yeah, a little bit more, but that's okay. Yeah, something like that.
But tell me, I'm always intrigued to know how it is we started with what we called the first 400, the pioneers. So what I said with you was that we were going to have a conversation, and I've done all the talking so far.
That's okay. That's okay.
Tell me how it is that you started in Subud. How did you even hear of it?
Well, I don't know if that's an interesting story, to be honest. It's not so special.
Yes, it is.
No, I heard about it from a music student. I was studying music at that time in the conservatory in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And I had been very interested in all sorts of spiritual and esoteric directions and movements and theories and stuff, but I hadn't found it yet, what I was looking for. And I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly. But anyway, I was having a Zen master at that time, but yeah. Anyway, when this person, he just came back from the Sydney World Congress in '89 and had some pictures. And then he said he went to Indonesia. And I said, but what did you do there? What is it all about? And so he said, well, you better talk to some ladies. So, and then I talked to a few ladies and they explained. And when I understood that there is no teacher and no guru and nobody telling you what to do, and that it's really a direct contact with God's power, I was very intrigued, and I wasn't sure if that was possible, but I was, I wanted to be opened. And I was very actually disappointed that I had to wait for a bit more than 3 months even, because it was summer. And I was a bit, I didn't like it. But the thing is, from the day that I decided I wanted to be opened, things changed for me already. So I remember very clearly that summer was different than before, and things started happening. And so, yeah.
Did you experience something at your first latihan? Do you remember?
Not, experience. I was very self-conscious, I would say. In my first latihan, I was probably a bit holding on to not knowing what was going to happen or something. But I had a dream the night before I was going to be opened, and that dream was beautiful. I felt that I could fly and that I was totally free. And I remember I was so happy when I woke up. I thought, wow, it's going to be wonderful. But okay, that was just a dream. It took some time for me to slowly sort of open up and let it happen. And then you were talking a bit ago, you were talking about someone crying, and I did a lot of crying in the first months, because there was a lot of pain that had to come out. So that was, but afterwards I always felt light and relieved, and I felt it was good. I went very regular, like 2 times a week. At that time I was still a student.
Were there many people? Was it a large group or a small group of people, and where was it?
This was in Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
There was a group, I think we did Latihan maybe with 10 ladies, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less, but sort of that. But some were rather, how do you say, mature in my eyes. I mean, I felt very young. I think I was the youngest, and they were all a bit older, and they had children, and they were talking about the families, and I was a student, but I didn't mind. I usually did my Latihan and I went home, because I had to take 2 trams and a bus and stuff. And I had my cello with me, a big thing. So I was carrying that around, and I just went home.
Tell me, you say you cried, but did you move about? Did you dance or sing, or did that come?
Yeah, slowly that came. Yes, but yes, I had a voice, I think, rather soon, but it developed bit by bit, I think. I mean, this is 33 years ago or 34 years ago, I think.
You may remember that when you were in Porto, you very kindly introduced me to Arifin.
Oh yes, last month.
Arifin Conrad. And I asked him to, since he is much younger than me. Everybody is much younger than me.
Yeah. It's not easy to be older than you, yeah.
Yeah. And so I asked him too, how did he even hear of Subud? Because in the period of 57, 60, well, really 57, 59, when the Eva Bartok story broke. It was the Eva Bartok story that broke and filled all the newspapers in Europe. And that's when the people in England, who were inexperienced helpers, began going to Norway, to Germany, and so on. I know people were Ruth Gruson going to Munich, and then into Switzerland, St. Gallen, and so on. And I went in 1958. I was asked to go to Madrid. And I was completely inexperienced. And I was asked, I met a whole lot of people through a fellow called Eugenio Pastor Frixa. And I didn't realize his real name is Senor Pastor. But anyway, that's another story. And I used to meet these Spanish people in cafes late at night. And they very quickly said, that they wanted to be opened. And I rang Coombe Springs and spoke to Shafruddin. And I said, chef, because I'd become very friendly with these Indonesians. And he said to me, you open them, Tony. And I can't explain it, but at that time, there weren't many books or anything. To say to somebody, you open them, we really had no idea. I mean, we knew enough that we were simply to do our exercise with them and say the opening words. So these people in Madrid, I mean, I opened, as they say, of course I didn't, the good Lord opened, but I opened 7 people all at once in Madame Millie Pinner's flat. Conde de Errante 22. I remember her address very well. And some of these people had remarkable experiences at their very first Latihan. Well, 4 of them certainly did. And one of them was really rather amusing, was actually called Jesus or Jesus Armenteros, I remember. And so, I mean, and some of them came up to me afterwards, very grateful. And, you feel, but I hadn't done anything, and so it's a marvelous thing. And anyway, I'm interrupting you now because I was asking you how you got on, and I remembered about Arifin, thinking, how on earth did a person who has had such wonderful experiences as he wrote about in The Journey, in that book at the end? I wondered how people hear about it. In those days, there was this extraordinary publicity over Eva Bartok, but of course that all disappeared. And after that, there was no publicity, and Bapak had said, no propaganda. So we were faced with this extraordinarily difficult thing that, on the other hand, he said, and I quoted right at the back of my book here, the very last thing I quote is that he says, if we don't actually propagate Subud, if we don't pass on this gift, we have committed a sin. And so all the time we have this thing that we mustn't make propaganda, but on the other hand, it is our duty to propagate Subud in some way or other.